Welcome. I'm Doug Smith from Kentucky Valley Educational Cooperative. So our goals or objectives for the day are that we're going to be looking at what is behavior. We're going to ask ourselves, we're going to talk about the behavior cycle, look at behavior categories, and look at factors influencing student behavior. And then we're also going to be looking at group dynamics, talk briefly about trauma-informed care, and then we're going to do relationship building activities. So what is behavior? All behavior is learned. A behavior is, since behavior is learned, behavior can also be changed by using explicit instructions and explicit expectations. You can change a behavior. Behavior is an action that is measurable and observable. Behavior is what we see or what we hear. And a behavior has to be an action. It's not how a student is feeling, but it's how that student expresses that feeling. And behavior serves one of two purposes. It's to either get something or to avoid something. All behaviors serve those purposes. So when we're looking at behavior, we think of the ABCs of behavior. The ABCs of behavior are the antecedent, behavior, and the consequence. An antecedent happens immediately before the behavior, immediately before the action. So the antecedent, you could say, is a trigger. What set this behavior into motion? The behavior is the action that the student portrays or the action that the student shows you or gives you. And then the consequence is your reaction, how you respond to that behavior. And that's one thing that we got to think about too when you're looking at reinforcement and punishment. Reinforcement is something that you do that increases the likelihood of that behavior occurring again. You got to think about a punishment is something that decreases the likelihood of that behavior happening again. So reinforcement increases that likelihood of that behavior happening. Punishment would decrease the likelihood of that behavior happening again. And then it also has to be looked at from the student's point of view. When you want a behavior to increase, you reinforce that behavior. Acknowledge those behaviors, praise those, and encourage those behaviors. So if you want a behavior to decrease, you would use a punishment. Try to and look at it from the student's point of view. Some behaviors of concern, where do they come from? Well, behaviors of concern are those acting out or behaviors that we have to deal with in the classroom. And they are cyclical in nature. They start out with a stimulus or a trigger or an antecedent, as we've already seen with the antecedent behavior consequence. That antecedent or that stimulus triggers thoughts. Those thoughts lead to our feelings. Our feelings are our emotions, and these emotions then drive the actions or the behaviors that we see the students portraying. And those actions then lead to consequences. And like I said, they're either positive or negative. And then those consequences then could become a new stimulus. And that new stimulus leads into the cycle again. So the stimulus or our trigger could be either positive or negative. If it's a positive stimulus or a positive trigger or a positive antecedent, then this is going to be a positive behavior cycle and our consequences are going to be positive. Now, if we have a negative stimulus, then that leads us into a negative behavior cycle and the consequences or actions and consequences are going to be negative. The best place that you can intervene in this behavior cycle is if you can control the stimulus, if you can make those environmental changes to the antecedent, then that's the best place to intervene. So we're looking at behavior categories. Behavior categories include carry-in behaviors, carry-over behaviors, and tune-in behaviors. Those things that are called, we'll look at it as carry-in behaviors, are things that students bring with them into our classroom or into our environment and our setting. We have very little, if at all, any control over carry-in behaviors. So things that are happening in the community, things that are happening at home, it is outside of the school environment. So they carry those things in with them. An example would be if, the little Dougie's parents were fighting last night. He didn't get any sleep. So when he comes to school, he may be cranky and upset and want to sleep. So Those are carrying behaviors. They bring those behaviors with them, and then you have to deal with them. Carryover behaviors are things that have happened in within your environment, within our school setting, but they're not resolved. They just carry over from setting to setting or from classroom to classroom. It may have been a couple of the students that you work with got into an argument on the bus. They get off the bus driver separates them. One of you sit here in the front seat, one of you sit in the back seat. Bus driver separates them. I took care of that problem. Well, no, not necessarily. You just separated them. You didn't resolve that situation. So they get off the bus and they go to the cafeteria for breakfast. They're standing in line at breakfast close to each other and they start mouthing off at each other again, start pushing and shoving. So one of you sit at this table, one of you sit over at this table. Don't look at each other, don't want to hear a word. I handled that situation. Well, you separated them. You didn't resolve that situation. The conflict is still there. So carryover behaviors, it may carry on over into the classroom or into the cafeteria again, or back out on the playground. So those are behaviors that are within our control, but they carry them over from setting to setting within our control. Until you have those issues resolved, you're going to have those carryover behaviors. Tune-in behaviors are those things that remind students of past traumatic experiences. Some of these things that could cause tune-in behaviors could be a sound, it could be the smell of the perfume that you wear, or cologne, or it could be the lighting. It could be a color that you have on. So it's tune-in behaviors are things that set these students' behaviors into motion are kind of difficult to understand because it's very difficult to figure out what trauma reminders are. What has happened to that young person in the past that you remind them of that person. And then sometimes it'll be I don't know what caused them to misbehave. I wasn't doing anything. All I said was, and then that may have been a tune in for those students. So the behavior categories carry in, remember, they carry these behaviors into the setting with them. Carry over are those behaviors that are carried over from within your control, but they're carried over from setting to setting within the school environment. And then again, tune in behaviors are those things that remind students of past experiences and they react in a way that may not be appropriate for the setting. Some factors that influence the way our individuals cope are diagnosis and educational eligibility. We all know that little Dougie is ADHD, so he's not going to be able to sit for long periods of time without getting up and moving about. Also, just be aware of some of the symptoms and predictable behaviors that our students have with diagnosis. And then when you're aware of those, you can be better informed when making educational decisions and various teaching strategies that you use or activities that you use based on their diagnosis and their educational eligibility. Also, be aware of the medications, illnesses, or allergies that our students have. Be aware as far as medications, there's a lot of stuff that you need to be aware of. Be aware of the purpose of the meds. Be aware of some of the side effects of the medications, the risks of the medications that our students are on. Now, our cognitive abilities don't just refer to what our students know or the knowledge that they have, but it refers to how the students learn, how they remember things, their problem solving abilities, how they pay attention. Some emotional capabilities that our students have, our students' stress and anxiety are major factors in behavior. And a lot of our kids are under a lot of stress and they've faced a lot of stressful situations and a lot of anxiety. And a lot of times, how many of our students have difficulties when our routine is changed? If your routine is changed, then that causes that stress, that causes that anxiety, that can trigger those behaviors that they want to escape or get away from that situation. So those emotional capabilities of our kids, you just got to be aware of, are they able to label their emotions and they talk to you about what's going on with them so that you can help them through situations. Some physical attributes that impact the way your students behave. A lot of times the big kid in the classroom may be the looked at as the bully, or maybe the kid that nobody wants to fool with. So because of the size of that student. Sometimes the little fellow in the classroom gets picked on quite a bit. Also, just look at, cleanliness, hygiene. Some social factors that you may think about as well are, the culture that our students come from, the family dynamics. What role does that student play in that family? What is their dynamics in that family? Also, with social factors too, look at community resources that our students have. Do these students have those resources of a church setting? Do they have resources outside of the school setting that they know where they are and they know how to get to those resources and how to use those resources? And so look at economic conditions that our students come from. So just be aware of the role models that our students have and the folks that they look up to. The group dynamics, we'll talk briefly about that, is where does that student fit in the group that they're in? What is your role in the group that you're associating with? So then also you got to look at trauma and adverse childhood experiences. So the traumas or some trauma exposures are things that the students have been exposed to, such as child maltreatment, could be physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, neglect, could be some things that for trauma could be family violence, could be community violence. Also look at accidents, medical traumas, and not just surgeries and things like that. But you also got to look at, our students have been isolated for so long, and been at homes with maybe situations that aren't ideal. And so look at those traumas and look at those things and how they could impact our students that we're working with. And also natural disasters. So as I was saying before, we're looking at social standing or group roles with our students. And Dr. Harold Polsky developed Polsky's Diamond, and this is a condensed version of that. So they said that all group roles have leaders, lieutenants, members, status seekers, and scapegoats. And the variables that influence those roles, the variables that drive those individuals in those roles are power, achievement, and affiliation. So if we look at our leaders in our classroom and think about your classroom, think about the students that you work with. In your classroom or even in your own group, you have a leader. You have someone that has the power, someone that's probably accomplished something, they have done something, they have achieved something that everyone else looks up to. And everyone wants to be part of that student's life or part of that student's inner circle of friends because they're the cool kid or they're the one that we look up to. So you usually only have one leader in your classroom, and you can probably pick that person out if you think about it. Then you have your lieutenants, and lieutenants again are the ones that they kind of back up what the leader says. They try to intimidate others to make them follow the step, follow line, follow what the leader says, do what the leader's telling us to do. Their primary need is affiliation. Most of the folks in your classroom will be members. And if you think about members are the ones that are just happy to be there. They're happy to be part of the classroom. If everyone else is behaving appropriately, they're going to behave appropriately. If everyone else is being silly and acting up, then they're going to do the same thing. They're the ones that I guess you could think of them as followers. They're usually consistent with their behaviors on what everyone else in the group are doing. So those folks are the ones that usually don't give you any problems at all. They just sit back and enjoy being there and being part of it. The next students that you think about, if you look at your classroom, are your status seekers. And it's just what it says. They don't know where they fit on this diamond or this pecking order. So they're going to act out to try to get the attention of the leaders and the lieutenants. So your status seekers are the ones that try to impress and bond with peers. They're probably the ones that are going to give you probably the most difficult time in the classroom. Because like I said, they're not sure where they fit in. They're not sure how they or what their role is. So they're going to do what they can to get the attention of everyone else in the classroom. You usually don't have but one or two or a couple of these kids. And sometimes these kids, if you get a student new to the class, those may be your status seekers because, like I said, they don't know where they fit in the pecking order. And then the last group or the last individuals in your classroom that you'll see are your scapegoats. And your scapegoats are what it is. They get blamed for everything. They're the kids that they're the most vulnerable individuals in the group. And like I said, they get blamed for everything. And oftentimes they'll take that blame so that they can fit in and become part of the group. They're the individuals that you have to protect the most, usually because again, if you go back to looking at things that affect the way that our students cope, they may be the smallest kid in the classroom, they may be the kid that has the less cognitive ability in the classroom, they may be the kid that has comes from a worse economic setting than everyone else in the classroom. They're just the kid that's different, and they're the one that you have to protect, take under your wing, and make sure that they're cared for. And a lot of times, you have to do a lot of social skills training with these individuals, and also provide them with, like I said, support and protection, because they're looking for someone to help take care of them. So think about your classroom. And like I said, the reason that this is a diamond, you usually have one leader, maybe a couple of lieutenants, one or two lieutenants. Most of you folks in your classroom are going to be your members. Then you're going to have maybe one or two status seekers and one or two, mostly one scapegoat, or the individual gets blamed for everything. So the next thing we want to look at briefly is we're going to be discussing a little bit about trauma. So what is trauma? Trauma is witnessing or experiencing an event that poses a real or perceived threat of death, serious injury, or sexual violation. And it is unique for each individual, and it's based on their experience and their perception of the event. So, what is traumatic stress? Traumatic stress is physical and emotional responses of a child to threatening situations. Traumatic stress is distinct from regular stress in that regular stress is short lived, comes and goes, and does not elicit intense feelings of terror, powerlessness, and lack of control. So, some areas that are influenced by trauma are attachment and relationships. So, a child that has been through a traumatic experience may lose faith in the world as being a safe place and may no longer trust people and trust that people are there to protect them or to care for them. Trauma also impacts physical health. When you're in a stressful situation, you produce those stress hormones, and then a lot of times you store those in your body. Students or children that have been through trauma exposures may also have those physical symptoms and also adverse health consequences. They may adapt poor coping skills to help them through a traumatic experience, which leads to health problems. Emotional regulation is overwhelming emotions interfere with the development of age appropriate self regulation, and children may exhibit erratic and intense emotional reactions to seemingly non threatening stimuli. Again, that may be a tune in behavior, something you said, or again, like I said, a color that you had on may remind them of some traumatic event. So, trauma also, with this intense emotional responses, it can elicit over controlled and under controlled behaviors. If they have that emotional response where I got to control everything, I got to make sure that I'm in charge of everything around me so that this experience, I'm not reliving this experience over and over and over. And then sometimes they just give up and whatever happens, happens. Cognitive distortions, they have inaccurate thoughts about themselves and refer to things as being negative, and look at life as everything's negative. So these cognitions or these thoughts that they have about themselves causes them not to be able to function in a classroom. And these thoughts often revolve around feelings of not being safe and not being cared for or not being worthy. And then, so if we look at self-concept and future orientation, trauma exposure can lead to negative expectations about students and about their future. So, some traumatic stress reactions elicit intense emotional responses, and they impact the student's ability to self regulate. So, some of the things that you may see may be intrusion, and those reactions may look like maybe nightmares. Students may have disturbing thoughts, and they may voice those disturbing thoughts, or students may have flashbacks as well. Also, if we look at avoidance, how many of our students we work with try to avoid certain people or places or objects. Those reactions may be to something that's reminding them of a trauma that they experienced. Also, it may be some internal reminders, such as their thoughts and feelings or physical sensations. Our hyper arousal or reactivity is, how many of our students we work with are irritable or aggressive? I'm going to get you before you get me. I'm going to take charge of this situation before it takes charge of me, before it takes control over me. Sometimes they have self destructive or reckless behaviors. Students may be jumpy. A lot of times they have problems with concentration. So when we're looking at our students and thinking about some of these labels or some of these diagnoses that they have, you know, they may be, just think about it, it may be a traumatic stress reaction along with that diagnosis that they have. Dissociation means they just kind of daydreaming, they just kind of space out, they just want to distance themselves from everything in the environment and everything around them. And then we have negative alterations in mood and cognition. Maybe in a persistently bad mood, a difficulty experiencing positive emotions, and a decrease. They may have a decreased interest in things that they were interested in before, and then always thinking bad things are going to happen. So just remember that these are intense feelings of anger, shame, helplessness, and the child feels overwhelmed to these traumatic stress uh, reminders. So when we're looking at trauma and we're looking at working with the students, our students, we got to look at as far as how do we look at these students differently. And a trauma lens allows us to understand and recognize the past role that trauma has played in today's behavior. So the trauma lens appreciates that trauma can cause a pervasive shift in the way youth perceive and relate to every aspect of the world. So a lot of times we look at our students and we say, "What in the world is wrong with you? You know, why did you do that? What's wrong with you?" And we look at those diagnoses and we look at those labels and we look at those categories and say, "This is what's wrong." What we need to start thinking about is maybe we start thinking about the traumas that our students have faced and look at, say, and asking ourselves, what's happened to you? So we look at not only what's wrong with the student and change that from what's wrong with you to looking at what's happened to you. What has happened to that student that that's causing these behaviors or these reactions to the stimuli? One thing that we need to think about too is our students have an invisible backpack. Well, everyone has an invisible backpack. And the invisible backpack, just think about it, is something that our students carry with them everywhere they go. And that invisible backpack is full of the thoughts that they have about the world, also about the people, school, themselves, everything that's happened to them, all their thoughts, all their feelings, all their emotions are tied up or in this invisible backpack. And we call it a backpack because you're always carrying it with you. It can be called an invisible suitcase, whatever helps you to remember that. So for trauma exposed youth, a lot of these thoughts and feelings and emotions are negative, and they revolve quite a bit around not being safe, not being cared for, not being worthy. And then some of those invisible backpack messages that our students have are that I'm unlovable, no one will take care of me, no one cares what happens to me, adults will hurt me, adults lie, there's no place is safe, so you can't hurt me, I'm going to make sure I get you first. And then I think one of the most powerful ones that I've thought about or read was I am invisible. How many of our kids, just imagine how you would feel if you thought you were invisible. And how many of our kids feel that way? And what kind of emotions are they going through? So when we're repacking this invisible backpack, when we're changing those negative thoughts to a positive, you want to be realistic in your thoughts. You want to be realistic in what you're repacking this backpack with. And so you always try to be honest with yourself. And since they are suffering from feelings of not being safe or not being cared for, not being worthy, you got to provide them with creating a sense of safety, competency, and worth in a classroom and in the school environment. So for the student that thinks I am unlovable, maybe you could build that invisible backpack with your actions and the way that you respond to that student by showing that you care about that student. Uh, So, no one will take care of me. Reassure those students while they're at school, you do everything that you can to make sure that they're safe. Now, you can't promise them that nothing bad will ever happen to them while they're at school, or nothing bad is ever going to happen to you while you're with me. Just make sure that you reassure them that you're going to do everything that you can to keep them safe. Also, when they're thinking about, adults hurt kids. Adults at school don't hurt kids. We're here to help you. We're here to encourage you. We'll be here if you need us. So encourage those students with that. And another thing about the ones that's invisible, find that little fellow or find that student and make an effort to have a conversation with that student. Show that student that you care and that you're willing to help them and you're there for them to help them get through situations that are trying times or and the struggles that they have. So when we look at the way our students respond to behaviors or respond to antecedents, those are coping strategies. And those coping strategies are behaviors used to tolerate adversity, disadvantage, or disability without correcting or eliminating the underlying condition. So coping is how I respond to that behavior, how I handle myself in situations when they are difficult. Sometimes our students, if we remember, we was talking about complex trauma. How complex trauma is those traumatic stressors that build up, continuously building up on top of each other. So a type of survival or type of coping in that situation is the coping strategies are survival coping. And survival coping is basically the kid's going to take care of themselves. I'm going to make sure that I am safe. I'm looking out for number one. I'm looking out for my own safety. And some survival coping things that you may see, they may look like rigid, distorted social information processing. Our students may look at every situation as something bad's going to happen to them, so they're going to be on the offensive. They're going to be ready for whatever comes at them. They're prepared, they're ready to make sure that they're in charge and they take control of things. May even see rigid, distrustful, callous behavior. Again, it goes back to the fact that the students are feeling a loss of personal integrity and they have a loss of trust for others around them. So they're going to respond in a way that, again, I'm looking out for me. I am going to survive. And then some of the survival coping is when their students have this type of posture, this type of behaviors, just remember that it is not a way of being aggressive or angry or towards you. It is a showing vulnerability. They need help. They need someone that can help them through this situation, help teach them better coping skills or new coping skills that they can use to help them work through situations that they're going through. So coping is how you respond to situations, and survival coping is I'm taking care of myself no matter what. Someone else, I'm going to get them before they get me. So when we look at relationship building, we'll briefly go into some of these, and I hope you do these. These are just a few of the things that I find that helped me when I was in the classroom. So you meet and greet, good morning, how you doing? Pleasantly greet students that you see by their name. Happy to see you. Man, we really missed you yesterday. I'm glad you made it back today. So just meet and greet your students, interact with them. Have a positive affect. And your affect is your mannerisms, how you carry yourself into the classroom. It's your confidence, it's your demeanor. Show you that you care and respect your students with that positive affect or that positive carrying yourself in a positive manner. Show interest. Show interest in hobbies that your students have. Connect with them through those things. Recognize milestones. Some milestones that you want to recognize. Of course, those milestones are your birthdays, things like that. But recognize that little Dougie made an 80 on a spelling test. First passing grade he's ever got on a spelling test. That's a milestone. Celebrate that. Effusive praise over the top. Wow, man, I'm so proud of you. That was excellent. And those are milestones, or those are things that you may not take things as important, but for that student, they could be very important. Also, with some other things as far as communicating with your students, attending and attuning. Attending means that we listen to the words that are being said. A lot of us attend to conversations. We listen to what's being said, we hear the words, and then we respond to them. Attuning means that you listen to the words, but you listening to the emotion that's comes along with that words, with the communication, with what they're saying. So attuning means you tune into the emotions. You tune into what is being said, or how it's being said, not just what is being said, but how it's being said. Are they angry? Can you hear that anger? Can you hear that anxiety? Can you hear the sadness? Those are things you tune into, those words that are being said, and you tune into the message that they're sending, and then respond appropriately. Consistency, you want to be consistent with your behavior. You want to be consistent with implementing the rules and expectations that you have. You want to be consistent across all settings. Have a consistent schedule, consistent routine, do things the same way. Those consistency provides for safety and security, and that's what our students need in our school setting. Active supervision uh, means that you randomly move around the environment. Don't take the same trek or the same path every day. Make sure that you can see and hear all students. They can see and hear you. Interact with your students. If you see a student that's exhibiting some inappropriate behaviors, you may have a signal that you use to signal that student that I see that. All right, get it back under control. Get back, remind them of the expectations. So use signals, use eye contact, use gestures, and that helps get those students back on track without calling attention to them and without having to get into that power struggle. You all know that if you call a middle school student out in front of their peers, they're going to respond back to you in a way that you responded to them or called them out. And then you get into that power struggle thing. And then once that happens, the student wins because they got to look good in front of their peers. So if you have signals, if you have gestures, if you have things like that, it allows them to check their behavior without calling attention to that. And then so that helps your day run smoother with those students. And then also remind the students of the expectations, redirect them as much as possible. Don't go straight to punishment or the consequences for their inappropriate behaviors. Give them a chance. We all have rough days. We all have rough spots sometimes. So give them a chance, remind them, redirect them. Because if you start out with consequences, you back yourself in a corner, you got nothing left. So just be aware of some of these things and catch them being good. Randomly catch students being good. Just praise them, acknowledge them. As we were saying before, if you want to see a behavior increase, reinforce that behavior, praise that behavior, acknowledge them. And when you're using praise, make sure that you're as specific about that praise as possible. One last thing that we want to look at quickly is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And this hierarchy of needs, the first thing that you'll see at the bottom is the basic needs, physiological needs, food, water, warmth, rest. If those basic needs are not met, and you can't function optimally. So sometimes when little Dougie comes into class and he needs to sleep or he's feeling bad, you know, you just got to let him put his head down for a few minutes because that is one of those physiological needs. After those physiological needs are met, then the needs for safety and security are next in the hierarchy. And then people want to experience, and students want to experience order and predictability and control in their lives. So that safety and the security helps provide that with our students that we work with. Some of our students may come from environments that aren't too safe, or they don't feel very secure in that environment. They don't have that attachment. Next thing is, as far as needs are concerned, you have the physiological needs or psychological needs, I'm sorry. And those are esteem needs, belongingness and love needs, intimate relationships, friendships. The third level of human needs is social, involves feelings of belongingness, and the need for interpersonal relationships motivates behavior here. Then, so friendship, trust, and acceptance. Again, if we go back to looking at Polsky's diamond, this is where that affiliation comes into play. So, and then after that, you have esteem needs of prestige and feeling of accomplishment. This is esteem for oneself, dignity, you've achieved something, you've mastered something. And then the desire for reputation or respect from others, your status or your prestige. And then final one, self-actualization, you look back on your career, you look back on your life, you look back on whatever, and you say, did I do the best that I could do? Did I reach my full potential, self-fulfillment, seeking personal growth and peak experiences? But the key ones that you need to focus on are the basic needs, physiological needs and safety needs. Once those needs are met, then the rest of the hierarchy builds upon that. So got a quick little video I want to show you, which is a cute little video, and then we'll wrap up. And so thank you very much. I really appreciate you being with us today.
Hey, Mr. Q. Did you see that? Why would somebody do that?
Please go into the classroom. No talking, quietly.
Hey, Miss Mara, how you doing?
We need you inside.
How do you think that makes us feel? I forgot my number.
What's your name?
Jordan.
What's your last name?
Carter.
All right. Go ahead.
School is hard enough.
Come on in, sit down quietly at your desk, and begin writing.
This kind of stuff just makes it harder.
I said quietly, please. Who's talking? Is it you, Sophie? Don't let it be you.
Don't believe me?
Sophie.
Please just watch.
I'm not up here for me, I'm up here for you. Pay attention. Okay? Now somebody answer me. Somebody needs to answer me really fast.
Every time we're ignored or yelled at or silenced, the teacher takes away what's possible.
No horseplay, no running, and especially no talking.
Moment by moment.
Listen,
Garrity, your student's behavior yesterday in the lunchroom, it was terrible. Next time, silent lunch.
did you hear that? Stay in line and catch a bubble. I'm not playing.
If this is education, we're in trouble. Bye, Miss McGarrity. Frederick Douglass said, once you learn to read, you'll be forever free. The way it is now, 2 of the 3 of us would never be able to really read. It doesn't have to be this way.
Hey, Jordan, how you doing? Good.
Everyone we meet throughout our day can make a difference.
I've been waiting for you to arrive.
All the difference.
Good, how are you? Hi, Jordan. Bye, Jason. Good morning, Jordan.
How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for asking. How are you?
Good.
Go ahead and put your number in.
Talk with us, not at us.
That's okay. I'll look it up for you. Go ahead, sweetheart.
Okay.
All right.
Teach us what we need to know. That's how we get smarter.
Well, good morning, Sophie, Janicia, and Jordan.
And when you talk with us and teach us, give us bigger and bigger words.
Now what I'd like you to do, children, is turn around and converse with your neighbor and discuss where the mother might have gone.
Words that we can use to read and understand.
She is prey for eagles, so she hunts at night.
And that will take us places we can never reach without you.
Remember, we're entering the learning zone. Now, how can we show our respect to the children and teachers who are working?
We can walk quietly.
Yes. Okay, kids, so what I'd like you to do is continue writing your narrative, documenting your emotions. If you were the baby owl and your mother abandoned you in the nest.
What can you do? Learn all that you can so that you can challenge us to be our best.
You would have stayed and assisted them in whatever they needed.
Share yourself with us and show us how to share ourselves with others. Give us courage. Give us compassion. Help us find our own voices so we can become who we are meant to be.
Why would you want to silence us?